the opportunity in one part of our public lives or another to work very closely with you, and we're very appreciative of your willingness to continue your public service, and we look forward to a good dialogue here about the direction of the administration and how we move forward together. We'll begin with Ana Mana-Santos. And as Ana comes forward, let me just say that when we confirmed Ms. Mana-Santos less than a year ago as an appointee of former Governor Schwarzenegger, I think I said then that she was an exceptionally qualified nominee. And nothing has changed. The fact that Ana has been willing to stay with it during these most tumultuous economic and fiscal times in California is a credit to you and to your public service spirit. We all know that we are dealing with another extraordinarily difficult budget, and I don't think that we want to redo the Budget Committee here in the Rules Committee. But I do think that we can hit on some of the major themes, talk a little bit about how you see the relationship between this particular budget challenge and this year's budget and California's fiscal stability going forward. That's what I'm interested in. Not so much the particulars of this or that program, but if we do this or something like it, what does it mean for us as a state then going forward in terms of maybe you having a less visible role in state affairs because the budget is not would not be so dominant? Welcome. I want to give you a chance, of course, to introduce family, friends who are here to make a brief opening statement, and then let's talk a little bit about fiscal stability. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. With me today is Sally Espinoza, my partner, and
hi, Sally.
Some of my good friends and colleagues. So thank you for having me. It's, when I started as a Senate fellow, I never imagined that I'd be asking you to confirm me as Director of Finance, and I definitely did not imagine that I'd be asking you to do that twice. The Senate will always be a very special place for me. It's here where I learned much of what I know, including the importance of facts and knowing the facts and doing quick and thorough analysis. I am grateful and humbled to Governor Brown for providing me the opportunity to be appointed as Director of Finance, and appreciate your consideration of that appointment. It's a privilege to be in public service, and it's a privilege to be part of the Governor's team serving the state during this very difficult and challenging time. I'm very fortunate to work with and serve alongside 372 Department of Finance staff who are among the brightest, hardest working, most knowledgeable and committed public servants in our state. It's my goal to continue to provide reliable and realistic information on the scope of the budget problem, timely and accurate information on options to address the budget problem, and my Department of Finance colleagues and I look forward to continuing to work with you and with your staff to assist in the fiscal management of our state. Thank you again, and I'll take a stab at answering the question. The governor's plan and foundational to the governor's plan was looking at not only balancing the budget this year, but really balancing the budget over the forecast period and putting the state into a better, which is basically for the next 4 years through 2014-15. So the plan is balanced in its approach, and then it's balanced in the numbers in terms of, as proposed, it would maintain that fiscal stability for the forecast period for the next 4 years and provide a more solid footing to handle and address many of the other challenges that the state faces, including costs associated with pensions, costs associated with healthcare reform, unemployment insurance, and other threats that we face into our future. So that was one of the foundational elements of the budget, and based on the projections that our department made with the January 10th budget, that budget would really be balanced for the forecast period. It would also include many significant changes in the state and local relationship to try to eliminate duplication, to reduce the areas of duplication between the state and local responsibility, and to make it more clear who does what in terms of the state and local relationship.
And not looking for you to criticize any past administration or past legislature, frankly, or even yourself in looking back, but if you could sort of give your point of view as to how this particular approach, again, quibbling about details, which the legislature has its prerogative to do, but in terms of the framework itself, what is the difference in your view between this framework and the past frameworks put forward by the last administration and passed by the last legislature?
I think in terms of when we look at budgets that in the past have had a projection that has been balanced over the forecast period, I think that has not happened for over a decade. We sometimes look to the LAO forecast of the 2098-99 budget, which provided for a balanced budget that year into the future. The governor's approach for formulating this, his proposed budget, was looking at being balanced for next year and balanced into the future. And looking at, matching one-time problem with one-time solutions, maximizing the number of ongoing solutions, so that we'd look at a budget that closed the gap, but not only this year, but into the future. When we look at prior budgets, even with substantial reductions and substantial changes, frequently they included still an out-year budget gap and the need for additional solutions to close the gap going into the future. This budget is balanced for the forecast period.
Very good. Last question, then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, and that is if you could talk a little bit more about the Department of Finance's view of the economy going forward, because everyone has an opinion here in terms of when we can and will begin to see growth in the housing sector, in the employment sector, and when we will be back, if we'll be back at all in the way that we had imagined or had once had.
Our forecast for the Department of Finance, including the January budget, and again, this will be reviewed and revised at the time of the May revision, includes basically the recession having officially ended and having a very slow recovery going forward. So when we look at our revenues are not estimated to be at the 2007-8 level for years to come. We don't see, while the job situation have started to improve, and we started to see some increases in private sector jobs, we are not seeing the rebound of the lost jobs to occur until about the third quarter in 2016. So the economy is recovering, but the recovery is a very slow recovery.
And nothing wrong in my view with projecting conservatively. Should I use that word, conservatively? But it is true that the department's revenue projections going forward are more conservative than the LAO's, correct?
Actually, the LAO's fiscal forecast is a little more conservative than the department's for the next 4 years. There's a slight difference between our forecast.
The LAO said that we could expect potentially $1 billion or $2 billion more than what finance has projected on the revenue side.
The LAO in their fiscal analysis talked about the potential economic improvements and what that would result in in terms of revenues. However, in their updated revenue information, their forecast for the 2-year period is about $700 million below the Department of Finance's forecast. So in one of their publications, they talked about looking at the economic improvement that the gross domestic product indicators that was more positive than what the Department of Finance had included in their economic projection. On the revenue side of the equation, they see weaker corporate profits. So that's a difference between them and us, and they're about $700 million lower than the Department of Finance.
On the revenue side, but they also project more robust economic growth going forward than the Department of Finance does, which could and might and will and hopefully, and let's all pray, will outweigh that $700 million.
Yeah, their gross domestic product number is more positive than the Department of Finance's.
All right. Very good. Colleagues, Senator Harman, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have had an opportunity to speak with Anna at length about this position. I'm very supportive of confirming her, and think she's been doing a great job. We look forward to more great work from your office. I did want to ask you, though, about something that a lot of Republicans are interested in, and it concerns the possibility of a 2-year budget cycle as opposed to a 1-year budget cycle. I'd like to get your thoughts and input of what you think of that proposal and what the benefits are and what the negatives are of it, if you have any.
I think in terms of the 2-year budget cycle, other states have different cycles than California's does, and one of the things that people point to as a benefit of a 2-year cycle is the possibility for additional oversight and additional looking into what's occurring in different programs and how programs are being implemented. A challenge associated with 2-year cycles is the time period between when the budget has to be revisited and what happens if there are substantial changes in the revenue picture or in the cost during that intervening 2-year period. And so how to have a 2-year budget cycle in a way that works in terms of being able to make quick changes so that the problem does not grow to the point where it becomes much harder to address is a challenge with 2-year cycles.
If those problems that you've just recognized, and I think they're valid ones, were dealt with in the enabling legislation, would you be supportive of a 2-year budget cycle, or would you rather keep it the way it is?
I'd be happy to provide information about the pluses and minuses of it, and whether or not we go to a 2-year cycle is something I defer to you and the governor on.
All right. Thank you very much.
That's an experienced finance director. Senator Alquist.
Thank you. I must say that it's a pleasure to be able to have a discussion today with two people, Ms. Mato Santos and Mr. Laird, of such proven high-quality caliber. So it's an honor to be able to talk with you. I just have two questions. California has experienced several severe budget years, which has clearly put stress on legislators and staff. And additionally, the baby boomer generation is retiring. So my first question is with respect to those who are retiring. If you could tell us what are your transition plans, what types of transition planning do you have, and do you feel confident that training within the department is sufficient for new staff, which will be trained with limited dollars?
Thank you. We have, at the department, in the context of reductions in state operations and pressures within the department, we've decided to prioritize and protect funding for training, to maintain a robust training curriculum so that people can receive both the training that's subject matter specific, as well as the general training on, on management and budgeting and the overall work that we do in state service. And so we've made that a priority, in part to ensure that we have adequately trained staff to be able to fill back in and assume roles after some of our staff retires. That said, retirements is a very significant challenge that we continue to work on. We've been working on identifying staff that can be trained. We just had a retirement in our revenue estimate shop, and we've brought in also a very competent revenue person, and we've been working on how to ensure that we're looking at, how does Department of Finance, Franchise Tax Board, Board of Equalization, all of the different streams that work in these interrelated process to make sure that we're supportive of each other, that we place a priority on training, and that we ensure we have adequate plans in place for succession planning.
Thank you. My second and last question is on the use of technology. I've been very interested in this for many, many years, and I really believe that once we really have a good system in place statewide, that not only will it save the state many dollars, but it will allow us in an efficient manner to make good policy decisions with the information. So my question has to do with Fiscal. The governor's budget includes a $29 million increase to continue Fiscal. Ultimately, Fiscal is projected to be a 12-year, $1.6 billion project whose aim is to have an IT system statewide to consolidate and integrate and cross-reference multiple kinds of budgeting, accounting, and procurement data in a single system. So the question is, there are several deadlines on the horizon for the completion of stage 1 of the contract, including selecting a contractor, a special report on the project to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and awarding a contract. Do you anticipate us to be on time and on schedule?
Our target date for awarding of the contracts is towards the end of this calendar year, but we are, reassessing that timeline and looking at the possibility for a delay of about up to 3 months. We're working on exactly when, whether or not we're going to have a delay, and that's the timeline that we're looking at.
And should there be a delay, the legislature will be notified in a time-appropriate manner?
Absolutely. And we're at the moment assessing it, and we'll be working with the legislature on any revisions to the schedule. It's appropriate. Fiscal is being procured in a new way for the state in terms of having vendors participate in the first stage of the procurement, so we can ensure that we have a better understanding of what the technology solutions can do, and they have a better understanding of what the needs of the states are, so that we can minimize the needs for adjustments to the system and maximize the chance that we have a successful project. And we're working through what that all ends up meaning for our timeline.
Excellent.
And we'll keep you informed.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Senator Fuller?
I really appreciated the time that Anna spent with me, and her work ethic and her clear-headedness and articulation of facts. And so I'm just here to sort of express my support for her and my happiness that we, in times of chaos, find some continuity among facts and things that help us all try to cope with what we have to do. I was particularly struck with her explanations for the value of figuring out how you do short and long-term plans, one-time funding, ongoing funding, how you get other people to understand the complexity of a budget like this in large groups. And her second phase, which would be retraining of individuals to change behaviors, because once you cut a budget, you have to help people change behaviors, or really it isn't as effective as you'd like it to be. So thank you, Anna, for being willing to take on this task.
Thank you.
Very good. Senator De Leon?
Thank you very much, Mr. Pro Tem. Anna, congratulations. A couple things. One is obviously this is a very arcane and complex process, the budget, and oftentimes there's a major disconnect between what happens in Sacramento, what happens in the Department of Finance, and with the rest of the state of California. You will become the chief financial policy advisor to the governor, and that's an awfully powerful position. And do you have any thoughts, and I'm not going to get into any other policy issues per se, but do you have any thoughts with regards to how we can shorten this disconnect, if you will, between what happens here in Sacramento when it comes to tax policy issue, when it comes to budgetary issues, and just the electorate as a whole, how we can better educate them as to what takes place here in Sacramento, because there's a lot of rancor, obviously. There's a lot of misinformation as well, and that contributes to a larger disconnect and more polarization, if you will. Any thoughts?
I think the governor is approaching the budget with an open and an open process, and starting first with what are the facts about the state, where does our dollars come from, where do our dollars go, and trying to make the budget more understandable and accessible to Californians. One of the things that consistent with the governor's approach for balancing the budget that we've done this year is to look through our publications and try to make sure that we are explaining things in a manner that hopefully is more accessible to Californians by providing information about the context in which programs occur, providing more information about how California compares to other states, and trying to instead of doing the Cliff Note version of budget of budget presentations try to provide a little more information about, what is CalWORKs, how many people are served, what percentage of the different roles that the program has, how it compares to programs in other states, et cetera, to be able to try to make that information available. And it's something that we will continue working on to try to figure out how to present budget information in a manner that's accessible to people who don't, who are not dealing with it every day.
Thank you. Mr. Pro Tem, if I can add just one quick commentary. I know back in 2009, when I served on the Budget Conference Committee, we sat across from each other, and I know it was a very tough position to be in as Deputy Director of Finance, and it's a tough position to be in today. But nonetheless, I admire your keen insight and your mastery of very arcane, dense issue, which is tax policy, and just the whole matter. You have a keen understanding of the numerous departments that we have, and I'm very impressed with your professionalism back then. It was a tough gig, as it is now, given the financial circumstances and what's on the table with regards to potential real draconian cuts as we move forward. So I just want to say I am very impressed on a personal note as a woman from Puerto Rico and as a Latina, and as probably the highest ranking Latina in the executive branch so far. I just want to say that you make our community very proud, and congratulations.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Nice. Thank you. Let's take testimony from those in support of the nominee. And okay, do you know what? They're not here because they're all working on the budget. This is absolutely the case. It's true. Any opposition? In some ways this is, it's never perfunctory because a confirmation is a confirmation, and it is significant and something certainly for the nominee to take pride in, but it's almost like to do anything but to strongly confirm this nominee would, I don't know, would make no sense, Anna, for all the reasons stated. And we know that over the months we'll work together, we'll have our disagreements, and in the end we'll figure it out for the betterment of the state of California. That's what it's about. So let's call the roll. Is there a motion? Moved by Senator Alquist. De Leon, go ahead.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. De Leon? Aye. De Leon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon? Aye. Harmon, aye. Steinberg? Aye. Steinberg, aye.
Very good. The nomination goes out 5-0. It'll proceed to the floor. Let's see, when is your year up? I anticipate probably the usual turnaround is about 2 weeks. We'll get on the floor and we'll take your nomination up proudly, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next, let us call up Secretary John Laird. John, of course, Secretary Laird is an appointee of Governor Brown as Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency. We all know Mr. Laird as a well-respected former Assembly colleague, chair of the Assembly Budget Committee for a number of years. We welcome you. We look forward to the dialogue. We invite you to introduce any family member or special guest, a brief opening statement, and then we want to have a good dialogue here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My mother and my spouse both wished to attend. It's probably better for my confirmation that they didn't, but they send their greetings to the committee. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to appear. I'm honored to have been appointed by Governor Brown, and I intend to work to the best of my ability to be successful in this position. The Resources Agency has 25 different different departments, boards, commissions, and conservancies with almost 18,000 employees. And I have a background in many of the issues that are contained in the departments of the agency, but I'm working very hard to get up to speed on any that are new to me. I was happy to respond to the questions. I'm glad that those are in the record. And I'm also conscious that when I was a legislator, I had a voting record, and I represented one district. And now I'm a member of a team that's led by the governor, who sets the policy for statewide interests and not just those of one district. And it is a different role, and I want to acknowledge it, but I think it's an important one. And a strong resources agency is also a strong partner in our economy and with jobs, whether it's in the siting of new renewables, the visitor-serving industry, making sure water is reliable to different parts of the state. Those are all economic engines and things that are very important to the jobs in the economy. And also, I wanted to mention that I know many of you know me as a legislator or because of 23 years in elected office, but I had a similar number of years working as an administrator, either being trained as a local government budget analyst or being a manager in local government, a nonprofit director for a number of years. And when I was a manager for local government, I had personnel responsibilities with regard to all disciplinary actions, staffing the Civil Service Commission, grievances, and even with one other person, designed a 32-hour boot camp for all the 450 managers and middle managers in county government to make sure that they were up to speed and managed correctly. And so I bring a lot of administrative experience to this position. And lastly, I just want to indicate that my door is always open. I think I've already, in the week since I was appointed, been meeting with countless stakeholders, particularly on the issue of water in California, that come from various geographic regions and with various different viewpoints. And I think it's important to the success that throughout my entire tenure, I keep that open door and I meet with people of divergent views and try to work them into the administrative positions. With that, I would look forward to any questions that you might have.
Me, if I may begin with a couple. First of all, I think it would be very good if you could amplify a little bit of what you said in your opening comments about the difference between being an activist legislator and an effective legislator and a cabinet secretary. I mean, on one level, it's obvious what the difference is, but what the difference is in terms of your own mindset and sense of responsibility. And then secondly, and then I'll have one more question after that, two parts. Secondly, I'd like you, if you would, to reflect a little bit on one particular experience I'm aware of yours during your legislative service, and that is your work with Senator Tim Leslie on the Tahoe Conservancy issues and what you did to cross the aisle and how you crossed the aisle.
Thank you very much. On the first question, I have to say that when I represented a single district, for example, on the water issue, which I assume there will be questions about at some point, I represented primarily the two largest pieces of my district were two counties that didn't import state water. As a result, there were strongly different interests than other legislators that relied on the Delta and the water system. And now I'm very conscious that I represent the entire state and that the great work that was done by the legislature in the last session on a compromise package, it's our charge to implement. And I know the question will probably draw me out on that. So I think it's a very different experience, and it's one that I take completely to heart. I think that I've already spoken about the fact that I've had to explain why I am supporting some budget cuts that I did not support when I was the budget chair, because I'm part of an administration that's trying to get to the end and upright the budget and how important that is. And I think that illustrates the different role. On the issue of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, my goal at that was to work across the aisle toward a solution. And it was very unusual at the time, and now I realize, because it was in my second year in the legislature, it was unusual in general, because Assemblymember Leslie and myself each had bills that set forth different ways to enact the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. And we worked together closely to align the bills and to try to come to a compromise. But I stood up in the environmental committees of the State Assembly and on the floor of the Assembly and asked my colleagues to pass Mr. Leslie's bill as well as my own, because even though I might have had problems with some things that were in his bill, the goal was to reach a compromise and to show faith and trust and to reach across the aisle to try to do that. And when we got to the Senate, we reached that compromise so that we had over 60 votes for it on concurrence coming back through the Assembly, and that it was a true bipartisan compromise, but a compromise that was regional as well in a good way. And the fact that for the first time we gave locals in the Sierra a seat at the table to talk about state investment in their area, the fact that they understood it was economic development and environmental protection, was a big success. It was used as the model for governance when the Delta Conservancy was set up, because we had worked that out in that bill. And I think it's an ethic that I do hope to carry over from the legislature into this service.
Let me ask my water question, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. You know, you were out of the legislature, Secretary Laird, in 2009 when we went through this Herculean process, and Senator Fuller and the other members of the committee know it very, very well, where a lot of us involved in this thing believe that we overcame, in large part, 3 decades worth of intransience around water issues. And of course there were some from the water world and some from the environmental community who didn't like different aspects of it. And I would like to hear your view of it. And most importantly, whether or not you believe that it lays the foundation for fundamentally beginning to fix California's water challenges going forward. There isn't much talk about it now. You know, we put the bond off for, I think, good reasons, but that is still pending in either its current form or some modified form, depending upon what we decide on a bipartisan basis. But how does the administration and how do you view that water package and what it means for the state going forward?
Well, first, let me congratulate you on the water package. As somebody that was the point person in a special session previously on water and attempted to negotiate a water bond with the governor in the infrastructure package, understand how hard it was. And I think as time goes on, people around the state are beginning to understand exactly how strong that was and exactly what progress it was. And right now, one of the reasons you're not hearing about it quite yet is because we are really working with the stakeholders quietly across the board. I walked out of a meeting of water providers upstream from the Delta just to come over here right now. And I think the significant thing about that legislation was the dual goals and the fact that they were enshrined in state law, because what it really said is that we need to operate the Delta in a scientific way that restores the habitat, and then we need to determine water reliability that comes from that, and everybody will get what they have sought for a long time from this, and you cannot do one without the other. They both have to happen. And I think the significant thing is the groundwork is laid, is it put those two goals out there, and we are committed, and the governor was very clear in public last fall that he supported those dual goals. And now I take it as my charge, along with beneficiary pays and the other things that he indicated came along with that, to implement those and to move ahead. And I think we are in real striking distance on both sides. And the thing that I think it is incumbent on us to emphasize is that everybody likes one of the goals and is sort of tolerant of the second goal. And yet both of them are interchangeable, are interlinked, and have to be achieved together. And that is part of my task, is to remind that to everybody as we move forward. And that if you want water reliability, you have to have the scientifically managed delta with habitat restoration. And so that is the goal. And we've also been working on the lawsuits because it is better that this be done through a stakeholder process and not ordered piecemeal by a court in a way that the public or the elected representatives don't have control in the matter. And so we've been moving ahead on all those fronts. The one appointment that's been made at the deputy secretary level was on this. It was in the first days of the administration to show emphasis. That deputy secretary had 33 meetings in Washington, D.C. last week, and we are just moving ahead on every level, talking to all parties. And I think we have a genuine shot during the tenure of this governor to get to significant milestones on both these. And so we're committed to doing it, and it has taken up a great amount of my effort already.
Thank you. Senator Fuller.
Thank you. John, thank you for the generous time you spent with me and discussing these many issues. And I want to start out with saying, I think you know we've had a long relationship, and I totally admire your fairness and your skill in these areas. But you know, I am weighing all the issues because, as you've pointed out, you're going to be growing from a local legislator and go above those of us who are only kind of local and move to a statewide perspective. Right. And that's a significant achievement. And so, you know, one of the questions that some of my constituents are sort of interested in is, I didn't get to in our meeting, but I have heard of a proposal to separate the State Water Project from the Department of Water Resources, possibly creating a joint powers agreement among all the interested water agencies. And my question is, would you be willing to sit down with interested parties to discuss such a proposal, especially given that our fiscal situation, maybe we could find some ways to diversify the costs of the project?
Well, maybe I benefit by following the finance director, who acknowledged that the final decision of that is the governor's and the legislature's to make. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I would meet with interested parties on that and provide any information that might be helpful in that process.
Thank you, John. I'd just like to sort of express that if the chair, who spent so much time and energy on water, is willing to trust you with our joint water project goals, I'll be willing to support you today. Thank you.
I really appreciate that.
Let's close the hearing. Very good. Senator Alquist.
Thank you. Well, John, it was a real pleasure to serve with you in the legislature, and I'm just really happy you're in this position for so many reasons. But if I had to pick one, it would be because of this looming water issue, because I believe you've demonstrated and bring to this a strength of compassion and objectivity and the ability to work with all people, which is certainly what we need on this issue. So wanted to say that piece. Another piece I'd like to talk about, though, is the rash of illegal marijuana farms found in our parks. And as I mentioned to you when you were in my office, in August of 2005, a fish and game warden was shot in my county, in Santa Clara County, during an early morning raid of a large marijuana farm. And, of course, the last thing anybody wants is to have someone stumble into a dangerous situation like this. And I'm wondering what steps can be taken and what other agencies can be involved in helping to help California eradicate these marijuana production farms in our parks. It's my first of two questions.
Okay, well, thank you. And I know this incident was near Mount Amanum, which is probably you and I are the only people that either know where it is or can come close to pronouncing it.
Can pronounce it, yes.
That incident, I know, led to a number of actions within the Fish and Game Department to try to look forward in dealing with it. For example, they're much more conscious now and try to plan with regard to air support in relation to those activities. There's now been a special class in the Peace Officer Standards Training that deals exactly with this issue so that there's more training forward and people aware of it. I know the lieutenant that was involved in that particular case has spoken around the state to different agencies and throughout that agency so people can strategize and think differently about it. And there are even 4 people in the Fish and Game Department that regularly find themselves on situations out in what they refer to as marijuana grows, that they have issued special guns that they feel are more equipped for them to feel safe and deal with those issues. I think that, to be honest, as we move into an issue of scarcer resources where we might be closing some parks, this is going to become an issue that we're going to have to even do further work on, and I'm committed to doing that as Secretary.
Thank you. That segues nicely into the second question, and that is, with this huge deficit, we will be closing some parks, and I think the question more is down the line, how many really will it be? And so I know you haven't been in the position too long yet, but I wonder, how do you decide what park to close? How do you weigh security, what the public thinks, which to keep open, which to close?
I think the important heart of your question is the criteria. And obviously, once again, it is the governor proposing and the legislature acting on this that is key. But there have to be a number of major factors in considering this. One is the visitation to a particular park, the revenue it brings in, the ease with which it could be closed, or whether it's a place that is in the wide open surrounded by urban areas and almost impossible to close. There are a certain number of so-called iconic landscapes. Frederick Olmsted Jr., the son of the man that designed Central Park, traveled for a year in California in the late 1920s, anticipating that there would be tremendous growth in the state, and looked at landscapes that he thought should be saved in the park system. And almost all those he identified were taken into the park system, and I think a higher priority needs to be given to those. And then there's the issue of security in closing a park. I think those would be the major factors in putting together a list and submitting it to the legislature.
Thank you.
Senator Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, congratulations on this nomination. I, like several of the other senators here at the dais, had the pleasure of serving with you in the Assembly for a number of years, and Chairman kind of stole my thunder about the Sierra Conservancy. That was a remarkable job that if you don't mind me calling you a liberal and calling Tim Leslie a conservative, and put the two of them together to come up with that plan was a remarkable achievement that both of you should be very proud of, and I'm sure you are. I'm a lifelong hunter and fisherman. I'm very interested in fish and game issues. Along with Senator Fuller, we both are members of the Legislative Outdoor Sportsmen's Caucus, and I wanted to get your view on the situation involving the Fish and Game Department and the lack of the appropriate number of game wardens to enforce the laws of the state of California. Can you give me a little oversight on what your thoughts and what your actions might be as far as addressing the shortage of game wardens in California?
Thanks. Two things. Even though I've just taken great pains to say my legislative actions don't matter as much as the fact I'm in an administration now, Senator Hollingsworth and I had a bipartisan reach across the aisle in 2006 to augment the salaries for fish and game wardens. They were negotiated into contracts. There was a raise over 2 years with an idea of dealing with the vacancies. And all it really did is stem the retirements rather than help fill the vacancies. With the economic downturn, the classes have been filled now, and so there's some hope in filling some of the vacancies. But I think the larger question is that the legislature last fall gave us a process. The governor signed a bill that said over the next 18 months we have to look at the mission of the department, how other states fund their departments, what might be different ways to structure it and still meet the mission. And I really welcome that, and I know that there are various concerns that different people have in different quarters about it, but I think it offers us a positive opportunity to address exactly those issues. And I really look forward to working with the legislators on this, because I think, as I mentioned to you previously, there have been 5 studies of the Fish and Game Department in the last 50 years. The first one lists Casper Weinberger as the member of one of the legislative committees that did the review. And they've said similar things, and one by one they've been put on a shelf and not acted on. And so I think it's not just that we do the process, but we work closely with members of the legislature, so what comes out of the process is something that you feel you could run with at the end or do something. And so there's a stakeholder group, an advisory committee specified in the legislature, and when I get up to speed on my own personal staff and in the Fish and Game Department, I hope to launch that process and try to address exactly the issue that you've brought forth.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator De Leon.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. John, congratulations. Is your role as Secretary of Resources, you have the Energy Commission under your belt, and I want to talk to you about efficiencies. I think we broached the subject the other day. We have efficiencies when it comes to refrigerators as well as washing machines. And something that's a little more specific, under the tutelage of Pro Tem Steinberg about maybe a month and a half ago, we had a retreat where we had 4 economists, and the economist was a very robust, dynamic conversation on unemployment, forecasting where the jobs will be in the future. Not all of them agreed with each other, but one thing that universally agreed with each other, pretty much so, was the whole issue of the frontier of new jobs, possibly. Unfortunately and sadly, when it comes to the housing crisis in California, these jobs, construction-related directly or indirectly, are just not going to come back in the foreseeable future. That's just our reality as it relates to the unemployment rate. And specifically, when we disaggregate the data, that specific cohort that is either currently unemployed or underemployed, that specifically, because you have the Energy Commission under the Secretary of Resources and soon to be right now already Secretary, expound a little bit on efficiencies and what the future may hold with regards to, say, for example, retrofitting in a lot of buildings up and down the state of California, and what that possibly means with terms of employment as well as how we reduce our carbon footprint.
Well, I know that efficiency standards that were adopted in California and in many ways were incented by Governor Brown in his first go-around as governor have led to over $50 billion in savings to California consumers, and that's money that goes into the economy elsewhere in addition to providing the jobs of actually doing it. And now we move into the next generation of these and try to figure out what we can do. And if we're really going to look at some of the ways that we have to plan, and I think Senator Steinberg's bill, SB 375, talks about more compact communities that are transit friendly. That's when you have to talk about retrofitting, because you're depending on places that exist now and that you're not developing everywhere outside of cities, but you're building inside. And so that's going to be an issue that we have to address as part of this. And I know that it's within the purview of the legislature and the governor in some ways to determine exactly how we do it, but we stand ready to work with you on that.
Okay, thank you, John. And one thing that just underscore what Ms. Alquist had mentioned with regards to parks, I had the wonderful opportunity to serve with you for 2 years. We sat next to each other, I in front of you, you behind me on the floor, and I always could tell you were an individual who didn't suffer fools quite easily, and that is a compliment because you kept a lot of folks on their toes, as well as you kept me on my toes as a young freshman who's clearly wet behind the ears when I first entered the assembly chambers.
I still need your vote, so I'm not going to stipulate to that.
Ms. Alquist talked about parks, and the first measure I introduced, I put across the desk, was AB 31 that dealt with open space and parks, whether it be active or passive parks, and more specifically had a narrow focus on the inequitable distribution, if you will, of park bond dollars, or any, for that matter, just general fund dollars, if you will, for parks for any child, regardless of who they are, where they come from. It's a tough time right now if there's going to be any park closures and what the criteria is utilized. Express a few thoughts with regards to the inequities, if you will, between park, open space, urban, rural areas. I think one of the challenges has always been that for those who have the financial wherewithal, they have the ability, if you will, to travel hours on end, to have an opportunity to enjoy open space and nature. It's tough sometimes. It's tough oftentimes, if you will, if you are working 2 or 3 jobs and you don't have the financial wherewithal to make that type of trek elsewhere. Expound a few thoughts, please.
Well, in the late 1990s, I think when Senator Steinberg was in the Assembly, and maybe then Assemblymember Harmon as well, there was a compromise on one of the largest parks bond measures because it was basically put half of it in urban areas, and not everybody can live in the shady pines of the Sierra Nevada. Guide money half to urban areas and half outside, and that worked very well. And I know you did your bill to work on the distribution of money in disadvantaged communities for parks. I think that that's turned out to be a successful formula in succeeding bond measures, is recognizing that not everybody can get to those areas that are outside of urban areas. And so whether it's river parkways or helping conservancies that are within urban areas, or just do things in a ring around certain urban areas, there's ways to help with the quality of parks and quality of life in that. And that seems to be reflected in the last few bond issues. And so that has actually been given to the agency as a direction by how that's been done and those bonds put together.
Well, thank you very much, John. Chase.
Secretary Laird, lightning round here. A couple quick answers in a couple areas I just want to make sure we cover and we get on the record. One relates to the Yolo bypass, which you know is essential to flood protection in the Sacramento region, home to 16,000-acre Yolo Basin wildlife area dedicated by President Clinton, named after Vic Fazio. Piece of the BDCP mitigation proposal. And the question, we know the answer, but let's just ask it. Will you work with local partners in any proposals to alter or shape the bypass? I think that's a concern of at least one of our members, and want to make sure that you have a chance to respond.
The answer is yes. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan process, which we are moving ahead on, and I need to mention, because it didn't come up in the previous answer, that we really want to spread the number of people that are involved in that, because it will help people buy into the outcome. And I think in that process, we're committed to look at the region you just indicated, work with all the stakeholders on it, and not look at it piecemeal. Look at it for all the potential that comes from it.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. couple categories. I'm just going to tick them off and maybe just your brief big picture point of view. Regulation duplication and the difficulty that we hear about all the time in good, clean businesses gaining the permits that they need to be able to get started. Reorganization and efficiencies within state government and specifically within your particular agency. And then finally, last but not least, green jobs and career technical education.
Let me just say quickly on green jobs and career technical education. I know in the confirmation for the chair of the Energy Commission that the chair made a commitment on that issue, and I intend to work with him to fulfill that commitment. I think that's very important. The technical education, putting people to work, training them in what will be a growing sector of the economy, and I know we can play a part of that by doing that.
Follow up on that. Not looking for a commitment, but just want to plant a seed. At some point during your tenure, I think it would be really interesting for you to seek some time before the State Board of Education and to go testify publicly about the relationship between your agency and the Department of Education and how you can cross agencies to develop a more bold agenda around linking education and the new clean energy economy. I think that would be very powerful.
I'd be open to that, and that leads totally to one of the two other questions you asked in the lightning round, which is on reorganization or how to look at things. Because I think that one of the problems in the agency when you have 25 boards, commissions, departments, is there's these issues that cross-cut between them, just as you described the one with the Board of Education outside. But I was mentioning in one meeting yesterday, if you're looking at the siting of renewable energy projects, the Energy Commission cites, Fish and Game talks about the habitat. The Department of Water Resources sometimes has the so-called disturbed lands that they would be located on. The ISO outside the agency might deal with transmission. And the relationship is sort of up to the top and to each other rather than figuring out a way to work together on the issues. And wherever there is an issue like that that might cut across, we have to figure out different ways within the agency to do it. And we will look at the potential for reorganization. We will look at administrative duplication and see if we can find it and deal with it. And on regulations, I understand the goal, both outmoded regulations and with the idea that there's some overlapping jurisdictions and try to figure out so that it is easier for somebody trying to accomplish something outside to get it done. And we will commit to work on that and work with other parties on that as appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Let's hear from witnesses in support of the nominee. Please. I'm going to ask, there's a long line here, and I think if you can state your name and the organization that you represent and indicate your support, that would be good and sufficient. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Louis Brown on behalf of a couple clients that have worked with Secretary Laird, California Citrus Mutual, the Nisei Farmers League, California Grape and True Fruit League from the agricultural industry, the California Water Alliance, from General Business, California Grocers Association, and the Illinois Tool Works, all in strong support of the Secretary's confirmation. Thank you.
Good. Very important. Thank you.
Randy Canals, East Bay Municipal. Randy Canals, East Bay Municipal Utility District, here in support of Secretary Laird's confirmation. Secretary Laird has demonstrated that he understands for a Delta solution to be durable and legitimate, that all interests must be involved, their needs considered and taken into account, and already in his first 6 weeks on the job, Mr. Laird, Secretary Laird, is demonstrating that.
Bill McGavern, Sierra Club, California, strongly in support of confirmation.
Justin Malone, on behalf of the California League of Conservation Voters, in strong support.
Thank you, Mr. Malone.
Senator Steinberg, members of the committee, Dan Cobb, Union Concerned Scientists. We were always impressed with Mr. Laird's willingness to go through a very deliberative process when he's dealing with issues and to listen to all stakeholders. We support his confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick Tomlinson with the California Strawberry Commission. We had the pleasure to have Mr. Laird represent portions of Monterey and Santa Cruz counties, and we were very pleased to offer our strong support for his appointment.
Thank you very much for testifying.
Patrick Eng on behalf of the California State Council of Labor is in strong support of his candidacy as somebody who can bring together economic development issues as well as environmental concerns of the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henning.
Thank you, Senator.
Good afternoon. Rico Mastrodonato with the Trust for Public Land and strong support.
Thank you very much.
Dan Taylor on behalf of Audubon, California. We echo the support. John is a proven leader and understands our issues and can guide us through the challenges we face today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Crystal Mullenkamp on behalf of Ocean Conservancy, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, California Trout, Trout Unlimited, and the California Conservation Corps, the Association of Local Conservation Corps, in support of confirmation.
Get it out. Thank you very much.
Hi, Gail Delahan here with Western Growers Association. We're pleased to support him this morning, this afternoon.
And this evening.
And this evening, and in the future. We found him to be very pragmatic and open-minded even when we do disagree, and we are looking forward to working with him.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, Patrick Leathers with the Gualco Group. In strong support of Secretary Laird, here on behalf of the following clients, the City of Santa Cruz.
I don't know if that helps me.
Solano County Water Agency, the CAM Manufacturing Institute, Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, and the Upper San Gabriel Valley MWD. I will submit that all of the wonderful things you've heard about Mr. Laird, personally and professionally, are in fact true. I'd like to add one, and that is his good humor. And that is going to be very important as we move forward, and you have our full support and assistance, Mr. Laird.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Pat Moran with Aaron Reed & Associates, representing the California Association of Professional Scientists. We support Mr. Laird's confirmation.
Thank you, Mr. Moran.
Mike Milkey on behalf of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. My apologies for my CEO, Carl Guardino, who was unavoidably detained. We represent 340 member companies in Silicon Valley, one out of every 3 private sector jobs. Long history with John Laird, strong support for his confirmation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Pablo Garza with the Nature Conservancy, and we strongly support Mr. Laird's confirmation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Kathy Cole with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. It's going to take strong leadership to keep the comprehensive Delta package moving forward, and we believe Mr. Laird is the right man for the job. We urge support for his appointment.
Thank you very much.
Jason Kanger, on behalf of Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, California Infill Builders Association, and California Relief, in strong support of confirmation.
Thank you very much.
Reed Addis on behalf of the Peninsula Open Space Trust, the Santa Cruz Land Trust, the Big Sur Land Trust, and also the California Coalition of Land Trust in strong support.
Thank you.
Cheryl Carter on behalf of NRDC. We strongly support Mr. Laird's confirmation.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. George Osborne, representing the California Fish and Game Wardens Association. You may recall in the past, Mr. Chairman, where the wardens vowed to never support any appointee of Governor Schwarzenegger. That is no longer the case, of course, and we look forward to working with the governor and Secretary Laird in increasing the number of game wardens so that we can properly enforce California's environmental laws. Thank you very much.
All just moving forward.
Luke Bright, Forest Forever, in strong support of Secretary Laird.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bright. Are there any witnesses here in opposition to the nominee? If not, is there a motion? Moved by Senator Harmon. Very good. Please call the roll.
Senators Alquist? Aye. Alquist, aye. DeLeon? Aye. DeLeon, aye. Fuller? Aye. Fuller, aye. Harmon? Aye. Harmon, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Thank you very much.
Very good. 5-0. That'll go to the floor again within about 2 weeks, Mr. Secretary. Did an outstanding job. And we look forward to working with you over these next 4 years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, we have some business here to conduct. We have items 2 through 17. Let me ask any of the members, do any of the members want to remove and reference a bill, which is contained within the binder itself? Yes.
It's on a package outside of the binder.
It's a package outside of the binder right here. So reference of bills on items 2 through 17. Is there any that you want removed? If not, then we'll take a motion on those together. Moved by Senator Alquist. Please call the roll.
Senators Alquist. Alquist, aye. DeLeon. DeLeon, aye. Fuller. Fuller, aye. Harmon. Harmon, aye. Steinberg.
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Thank you very much. We have one more item, and it's an executive session item, so we need to ask the members of the public if they could please exit.